I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of More Than Kurosawa. And this week we're going to be looking at a really unique filmmaker that's interested in teenage and young adult stories told really naturalistically and very uniquely. The movie we're covering today is April Story by director Shunji Iwai. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is review a different Asian movie by a different Asian director, talk about the filmmaker, why I want to cover them, because we do a new filmmaker every single week and a new movie every single week to ultimately help us understand and paint in the details of the wide world of Asian cinema to showcase that there's more than Kurosawa, there's more than Bong Joon-ho. I know those are a lot of people's kind of first introduction to some Asian movies, or Miyazaki in the case of something like anime. But the point of this series, and we've done a bunch of these videos now with directors from all different kind of many East Asian countries, is to give an understanding and to highlight a great director every single week and a great movie of theirs to start with if you haven't seen any of their movies, as a great kind of starting point. But also we'd like to talk about a movie that I really connected with that I think is really great and worthy of some study. So if you appreciate the video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. These videos come out Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time and have been for a long time. We are nearing the end of this series. Come the middle of October, we'll start the flagship series on this channel, Old Oscar Countdown. So if you're a fan of that series, you'll have to wait a few more weeks. But if you're a fan of this series, we're going to be coming to the end. So if you do have any suggestions of any filmmakers that you'd like me to cover, that's definitely something that I'd love to hear in the comments down below. But without further ado, let's jump into things. Starting off in the first half of the video, the discussion of the filmmaker, why I want to cover Shunji Iwai. Because we talk about a new filmmaker every single week, I do like to dedicate the first half of the video to talking about them, why they're an interesting filmmaker, and why I wanted to cover them. And I think the big reason for me was because I want to cover a filmmaker that isn't very varied, that has an obsession. You see, there are some filmmakers, let's say like a Rob Reiner, who will do a fantasy movie in Princess Bride, and then do a courtroom drama in A Few Good Men, and then do a family drama in North, and then do a comedy, and This Is Spinal Tap, and they can do kind of all these different genres, and they're going back and forth. And then there's some filmmakers like, I would say, Michael Mann, who makes almost the same one or two movies every single time. Like, you could take the kind of connection between Thief and Ferrari and that kind of obsessive man and his place in the world, or, you know, man's interested, I think, in celebrity and the pressures of being a public figure as well. So he kind of makes a similar movie over and over again, but those movies, those kind of themes for Mann really fascinate him. So that's why he kind of continues to return to them. And I think Iwai is more of a Mann filmmaker than he is a Rob Reiner filmmaker. A lot of his movies, I haven't seen all of them, but the ones that I have seen, Love Letter, Hannah and Alice, All About Lily Shoo Shoo, you know, you name it, the April Story, they're all centering around this period in a young person's life. It's either high school or it's college, or maybe just out of college. Even in more of his recent films, it's a teacher teaching high school, so it's always kind of in this formative period of time. I don't know necessarily why it fascinates him, but because it fascinates him, it fascinates me. Because he's so dedicated to making his kind of viewpoint of being this along the ride observer of many of these formative moments in someone's life, he's constantly returning to these ideas and exploring kind of either love, relationship, or trauma or bullying within this period throughout multiple different of his movies. And what I think he's great at with these movies is continually allow us to feel like we are a part of the group, or a part of the people, or really connected to our main characters' lives and kind of interior lives. And I think he does that in part because of this kind of unique visual style and unique camera work. So he uses a lot of handheld cameras with always shooting outside, pretty naturalistic lighting, if a little bit maybe muted, feels almost dreamlike, but pretty realistic, I would say. Even the lenses are a little bit more of a wide angle lens, so they're more mimicking the human eye in terms of nothing stylized like a telephoto lens where the background is completely blurred out and there's bokeh or anything like that. It is pretty standard to how a normal person, we see the day every day. But because we have this handheld camera where it's a little bit jarring, I think, at first for a lot of his movies, you almost feel that there's a person there. But I think after a while you get into the rhythms, you feel like a person along with the journey because the angle, the lens, in terms of its wide angleness, feels like more of a human eye than it is anything stylized. Feels very naturalistic. Like I said, they're shooting outside. And because we're using a handheld camera, there is like what I would call a breath to the movie. When you think of like a Steadicam, I mean, training scenes or anything on a dolly, right? Everything's very stable and moved and can almost be kind of omniscient. But when you see a handheld camera, if you think of, someone like the works of Emmanuel Lubezki, we did Birdman and The Revenant, or to the Terrence Malick movies, the more recent Terrence Malick movies, there is a breath to it, because even if someone is, holding the camera still, there is technically still someone holding the camera, and there is this kind of little bit of sway of them just breathing and moving and being a person. So because we have that, we almost always feel like an observer within his movies. And he uses that in different ways, but he uses that as a really powerful tool to help us connect with the characters because we feel like we're one of the people. It's Hannah and Alice and the audience. Or in All About Lily Shoo Shoo, it's like there's a tragedy to the fact that we're one of the people there and we can't do anything about the kind of events of the movie without spoiling anything. So he uses it to different effects, but it's always this kind of, you're like one of the other kids. That's what I've always felt like. Or it's, someone recalling a memory or a dream that they've had of them being in a place. It maybe feels dreamlike in that way that you don't always feel like you have agency. You're kind of just a passenger along for the ride. But I find that to be a very immersive camera work technique to help us connect. So that when I watch a movie like April Story about a girl, Japanese girl in the 90s going to school in Tokyo, like I have no real connection to that whatsoever. I'm completely the opposite. And yet I found the movie so relatable, so kind of well observed, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I think that has a lot to do with Noboru Shinoda, who was Iwai's longtime cinematographer before he kind of passed away in the mid-2000s. But a lot of his earlier movies, All About Lily Shoo Shoo, Love Letter, April Story, have that very distinct camera work that he worked with Iwai on, and really just beautiful images to look at. And then when you think about, I think about the plots of his movies, they're not very plot heavy. They're very much, like I said, you as one of the kids in a school, going to school, vibes more than plot and kind of day in the life as we kind of flow along and go through from story to story. And his movies are more so meant to be felt than understood. So you may not always be on his wavelength. I wasn't always on all of his wavelength for all of his movies, but I do think when they do kind of resonate emotionally, it feels very personal, it feels intimate, and it feels even more emotional because of that kind of passive observer style of camera work that he's utilizing in this very unique period of time of someone's kind of formative life, and some of the themes that he's interested in: peer pressure, young love, defining yourself as a person. I think he's kind of constantly looking back at that period of time. And like I said, because that fascinates him, it fascinates me. So he's very much an interesting filmmaker with a long career and lots of different types of movies, but in many ways he feels like he's trying to make the same movie over and over again, just kind of told from different viewpoints, or about the good version, the bad version. Is it tragic? Is it happy? Is it relatable? Is it shy? Is it, all this kind of depth within a kind of similar theme. But speaking about the film that we're going to be discussing today, the movie is April Story. It is about a young girl who travels halfway across the country of Japan to go to university in Tokyo. She's moving by herself in an apartment by herself. Doesn't really know anybody there, and that is the movie. It's us along with her trying to fit in, meet friends, explore things, and I think this is a really well-observed movie. That's what I kind of kept on going back towards. The details feel accurate and true, and like I said, to me, relatable, and maybe that's why I was really blown away by the movie, because I went into the series thinking, okay, probably All About Lily Shoo Shoo, that's kind of his most iconic movie, but maybe I'll talk about a love story. I really like Hannah and Alice as a joyful kind of a movie. But April Story was the first time watch for me, and really blew me away, maybe because it's the part of life that I'm in. Similarly, that kind of start of your life and being in a new place, and there's definitely stuff that I kind of connected to, but I think could connect to a lot of people. because of how the story is really told visually. Going back there to the camera work, this one is less of a passive observer and more connected to the POV of our main character. And what's interesting about the movie is just, like I said, how well told it is visually, how so much of the emotions are conveyed without dialogue, but through the storytelling. So there will be a scene where we see her see a concert that maybe she's interested in, but then we kind of get a recognition on her face that there's maybe too many people, and she tries to go through the crowd, but then she decides, you know what, I'm just going to go away. So we can see like an interest and then that die of interest just through acting and through some of the visual storytelling. And that's always the most powerful emotional stuff for me. You know, it'd be one thing if she just said out loud, you know, with dialogue, oh, I'm shy, that's why I won't do these things. But instead you have a scene like that, and because you're putting it together kind of in real time, I think the emotional connection hits harder because you're themselves, the audience is doing the work for it. And there's plenty of these kind of small, really well observed, detailed scenes. I'm thinking about her at the kitchen table with the kind of singular one light, and it's a cramped apartment, and she's got her little table and her little food, and she's trying to make it this big thing, and it doesn't feel like this big thing because she's kind of by herself and doesn't have anyone to share it with. And what's interesting about her as a character is how passive she is. You see in a lot of movies, characters are active because a lot of movies are plot-centric and are trying to drive a plot forward. So a main character kind of make decisions, do stuff that drive the plot forward, and then the rest of the movie is them dealing with their consequences of their actions, let's say. But this movie, the character is very passive. A lot of things kind of happen to her. But I think why this is actually a genius move for this type of a story is because this period in her life, you're moving to a new place, you're just trying to get kind of a vibe of things. You're trying to understand the flows of the city or the rhythms of a university of people that are already there, or a new school or an apartment. You're trying to do things on your own. You're trying to figure things out. So the actions in the movie are not driven by the character, but they're driven by people giving her decisions. And in a period of time of college, there are a lot of decisions. Who are going to be your friends? Where are you going to live? What are you going to eat? How are you going to make relationships? This is constant kind of decision making. And I think that was the kind of genius move of the movie, is to be still a passive story and let the actions come by other characters presenting our main character with decisions, and then how she reacts to those decisions helps drive the story. And I say it's a well-observed movie. It's also a great movie about shyness, I think, too. About how difficult it can be for, people in socially anxious kind of scenarios or awkward scenarios. You can't help but kind of wince and the embarrassment of the reason of, oh, I know she wants to go do that, but she maybe doesn't have the courage right now, and I didn't have the exact same experience, but I understand that, and you wince and kind of can feel emotionally and empathetic towards her. There's all these kind of great small moments that you realize are just well observed, feel natural, and like I said, because it's not a movie heavy on dialogue, a lot of those moments, naturally for a movie that's about shyness, are told visually. So you have a movie that's so well observed, a movie that is about shyness, and you have a really passive character, which makes sense to the shyness theme that's going on. Smartly, though, we're still able to move forward with the plot, with some of the decision making. I think it's a great movie to talk about shyness because it's a time in someone's life where they're actually having to make a lot of decisions, so you don't need to be really proactive with your character. And then because there's not a lot of dialogue, that makes sense to a person who would be more shy. And then also the benefit of that is that you get to tell those emotions more visually, kind of through the storytelling. So a really well-observed movie about shyness that gets all the small details correct, using its very naturalistic point of view camera work to its benefit to have us connect with that main character so much, even though maybe you will be completely different as an audience member. I think you'll be able to get a lot from it. It's a smaller one in his movies, only an hour and 7 minutes. So if you've checked out some of his other movies, or if you've seen some of his other movies and liked them, definitely give it a shot to April Story. I was really blown away by its kind of powerful intimacy that I think is a signature of Iwai's work. And once again, another example that when it comes to Asian cinema, there is just so much more than Kurosawa. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know if you've seen this movie, if you've seen some of other Iwai's movies, and if you want me to cover another filmmaker. Try to keep it a little bit more obscure. I have a couple in mind to close the series out, but of course I'm always open to suggestions. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.